the reason Ernest had his head bowed was that he was reverent for me. That's what it was. Well, it's been a while since I've been here, and I'm not exactly thrilled for the reason I am here, but nevertheless, before I get any farther, there's one person in this room that I did not know was shy, but didn't introduce herself, and that's Amy. Amy, stand up. Amy and Patty and myself were drinking buddies. Every Tuesday and Thursday we get together and swap lives, and Amy's a very talented lady, artist. She does a whole lot of other things, and she's a very special person. Patty's just Patty. I mean, you know, there's not much I can say about her, so we'll go on from that. We're here today to talk about YF-16 number 2. And as you probably remember, I was the flight test engineer on YF-16 number 2 after I finished working for Jerry Murph on the design concepts for it. So here's a picture of the airplane as it was painted for the Paris Air Show. And you can see some of the capabilities that the airplane had, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. The upper left-hand corner there is the airplane in its camouflaged iCloud design, which turned out to be like a spotlight whenever it was flying around in the air. So it got it got repainted several times, and finally wound up in the red, white, and blue that you see up on the next slide. The chief test pilot was Phil Oestreicher. Phil and Neil Anderson were the two company pilots that flew. I actually flew right seat with Neil in the F-111 program and thought I'd gotten rid of him, and then no, there I was back and working with Phil and Neil again. So, but they were two very talented pilots, and we had a lot of good times together working on this program. If you notice that I may have gone one too far here. Anyhow, the airplane flew, there it is. Airplane flew for the first time in May of 1974. And the reason it flew so late, because as you well know, YF-16 number 1 had flight 0 the first week in January out at Edwards Air Force Base. And the reason YF-16 number 2 took 5 months to get in the air was that we stopped production on that airplane when the Air Force announced that this was no longer a flight demonstration program or a technology demonstration program. It was in fact going to be a program to replace the F-4s in the U.S. Air Force inventory. So we stopped YF-16 number 2. We put a range-only radar in it. We put a gun in it. We put external tank capability and external carriage capability for the airplane. And while it was there at Fort Worth, we also used it to certify the refueling system. We actually got a KC-135 up on the ramp over Building 78, put the F-16 down below, and hooked up the boom to the airplane to validate the fuel transfer. So we did a lot of innovative things on this program, and I like to talk about this program a lot because it was a program where I would say most of the people that got assigned to it were people that their bosses didn't want them in the main plant for some reason or the other. So we were a group of misfits that turned out to be a damn good design team and a damn good support team. And that group was really the reason that the F-16 ever took hold. It was really a spectacular group. I did have problems with my boss at the time in design, but I just told you who it was, so I won't go any further with that. The airplane flew until it had another gear problem and scraped its nose off, and at that point it was sent up to Rome to be a radar airplane, upside down and backwards up on top of the radar building there at the Air Base in Rome, New York. The thing that this program did for me was it got me to do 3 things simultaneously, or in series. 1, I got back into design for a while, which I'd gotten out of. 2, I got back into the flight test department with YF-16 number 2. And the reason I got back in this flight test department was there was a guy that was the CEO, and his name was Lewis. And the person that was running the flight test program kept telling him that he couldn't get more than about 8 or 9 successful flights a month. And to Lewis, that was totally unacceptable. So another good friend of mine that I'd almost come to work at the same time with, Gordon Smith, who had YF-16 number 1, I was transferred over and I was told, you've got to make more successful flights than that. So I went over to Coburn's and got a great big roll of butcher paper on a Saturday morning, and Gordon and I rolled that down the aisle and started plotting out the entire flight test program. And we did the entire flight test program, and it was easy to get successful flights because we had 3 pilots. We had Neil or Phil, a company pilot. We had a golden arm, which was Jim Ryder, and we had a operational pilot that was a guy named Duke Johnston. Now, any one of those 4 people had enough ego to fill a room. And so each one of them had to fly the airplane. And so what happened was you could do one flight 3 times. And during that 3 times, you got all the data that you needed, even if you missed it off of flight 1. So it was really beneficial, and we wound up having successful flights in the neighborhood of 22 or 23 a month. And one day we flew 6 flights in one day with one airplane. The airplane was very easy to maintain, very easy to turn around, and it was exactly what the Air Force needed in their role as a backup for the F-15. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin. And Kevin's going to show you the airplane and the restoration projects that are going on with it now. Kevin?
Thanks, Zim. As Zim said, well, I've kind of picked up from Bill Morris. I've gone from working in engineering all that time. Now I'm a crew chief on the line out there doing sheet metal repairs on the jet. So it's been kind of interesting. Talk about this one. He said after that last landing in August of 79, the aircraft ended up on its nose. We actually can find the part that broke in the nose gear well. It was the retract extension actuator came off the bulkhead. So the gear was never going to lock up. So they sent it up to Rome. You can see how it looked here with the original nose. And what they wanted to do was use it for the last 40 years. It's been up on a pole as a antenna test bird. And they wanted to make it representative of the production airplane. So we're going to show you some of the things they did to the airplane that we're trying to undo to make it back like it was for our display. So here's where they had it upside down. And this was one of our problems in restoring this airplane, is it spent about half its life upside down. And all the water drains on an F-16 are on the bottom, not on the top. So all the screws and nut plates are on the top side of the airplane are just a solid mass of rust. We've been drilling out fasteners and replacing nut plates for the last 2 years. I'll show you some of the areas we worked on that. But this airplane served a very useful purpose. After they modified it and to make it look like a production airplane, every antenna, every electronic warfare package, every comm antenna was tested on here with all the different stores packages that you could hang on the airplane. So they went through all these tests to certify everything that was going into production. So this airplane was still up on a pole in 2018 with conformal fuel tanks on the top side of it. So it went all the way up through the Block 70 tests. When the production line over here temporarily shut down, the Air Force thought they were done with it, and so they put it up for surplus. And if we hadn't grabbed it, it was going to go to Eglin as a target. K. Granger and some other folks in the Air Force helped us secure this aircraft, get it brought here to the Fort Worth Aviation Museum. Bill Morris and Ben Guttery were a big piece of that, getting it moved here. When we got it, it looked kind of sad. It was sitting on its belly, and you can't quite tell. There's a big steel frame here, and they put two big steel plates on the side of the body here, and that's what attached to that tower. When we got it, they had thrown away the landing gear. They fixed Neil Anderson's problem by throwing away the YF-16 landing gear. They had grafted on a production size F-16 radome. You know, the YF had that nice little skinny nose. Well, what they did was they just added a bunch of sheet metal, and you can see here we were taking it off the bottom. They put a production radome on there to make it look like a production aircraft with we actually have a radar dish that came out of it. So we've got all kinds of things in our collection now. A lot of debate. What are we going to do with this now that we got it? You know, because it didn't have any landing gear under it. There was thoughts of, do we put it on a pole? Do we, you know, how do we hold on to this thing? And how do we get it back? You know, there was a lot of question about what do we want to make it look like? And the answer always came back to, we want this airplane to look like it looked in May of 1975, right before the Paris Air Show. And that's our target, and that's where we're headed with all this. So first step was figuring out, what did they do to this poor little jet? And we walked around with drawings and paperwork and found this is a view inside the inlet here. And they had stretched the airplane 10 inches. The production F-16 is 10 inches longer than the YFs. They added more gas, and they changed the way the landing gear retract actuator went in, and put a bigger ECS package in. So the airplane is 10 inches longer. The center fuselage is identical. All the bulkheads are in the same place. The landing gear is still at 341.8. But the front end, all the bulkhead stations are off 10 inches of what we think of as normal F-16 numbers. So I kind of had to relearn some things in my head. You can see some of their sheet metal work. They just added this 10-inch strip here. This was just brute force stuff on the inside, and they cut a bunch of holes in the duct where they ran wiring and plumbing for their tests, because they never intended to fly again. So we've been having to do a lot of repairs on that. Once we got in there, you can see, we call it aviation archaeology, all the way down to the original light blue and white paint shows through. Then you find then they put gray paint over that, and then they put the red, white, and blue air show paint job over that. And then these guys at the lab, to put it on the test pole, sprayed it with metallic gray top coat to make it a uniform ground plane. So it's kind of hidden. We started opening things up. We started drilling out fasteners, and Nick, you go through a lot of drill bits, drilling out Tridare fasteners for weeks and weeks at a time. We opened up the ammo drum and discovered they had built the Brooklyn Bridge inside there. Because the structure really wasn't meant to be stretched and float in space, so they built this massive beam set in here, and those are 3-inch I-beams, aluminum, and big plates, and they bolted it to the two sides of the ammo drum, and that was kind of holding it together. So we said, well, that's got to go. One of the other interesting things we found, there's a place in Mineral Wells called Evair Aircraft Supply, and they buy surplus from the company. And we found the original serial number 1 ammo drum that goes with this airplane, because GE made that custom for this airplane. They took an F-15 drum and shortened it by 2/3, and it's labeled YF-16. And we know since this was the only airplane that had a gun, it goes with this airplane. So we've actually got that part. Someday we'll put it on display with the jet. So we got that all in there, and you can actually see all this brown here is rust on the aluminum from all the fasteners that were rusting because it was stored upside down full of water for so long. It was a watermark in the ammo drum bay. Started opening more things up. There's Steve Smith right there. I don't know if you guys know Steve. He was a mechanic on the flight line and in the factory for 35 years. Started working on things. Oh, by the way, this was also the jet that fired the AIM-7 off the landing gear doors. And the landing gear doors were modified to carry the AIM-7, and that included adding these big phenolic fairings on there. Now we've decided to take those off because we didn't have the AIM-7 gear doors anymore. We've taken those off the airplane. opened up the rest of the panels, figured out what we had, and then we started working on how are we going to unstretch this airplane to put it back like it was in 1975. So the answer was we had to build tooling. You know, this is the equivalent of final assembly mate in the factory done in the field. You know, we didn't have the big mate fixtures. In fact, by the time we got this jet, they'd all gone to South Carolina. So we had to create our own tooling here. Broke out the Granger catalog, got some nice rolling wheels, went to the iron store and got, you know, steel channels, started welding it together, and we built up this wooden cribbing to support it. And just like in the factory, we picked it up at the nose gear mounts at the 189 bulkhead here. We had one under the cockpit and one back here. And these tracks, we put in adjustments so we could bring it up and down and level the airplane as we had to put it back together. So then we started taking out all the other fasteners and disassembling the Brooklyn Bridge inside the ammo drum. Here we are, sawing the lady in half, October 2020. A little bit of a gut check. You know, we knew we had to take it apart, but the answer was, please don't drop it. You know, we don't want to hurt the airplane. There I am up on top of the airplane here. This is Bill Morris right here and his crew here. Among other people working on this, Dave Anderson, his dad, V.K. Anderson, was one of the test engineers on the YF-16 program. Rick Ostreicher, right here, his dad, Phil Ostreicher, flew it. So these guys have an emotional attachment to getting this jet back together and doing it right. Yeah, so basically we undid all the fasteners and the shear webs, all the outside skin panels, and just rolled it forward about 3 feet. Got in there and figured out what we had, took it apart. You can see where the shear webs were 10 inches too long. We went in and cut those back. That was actually a piece they'd added onto it. Same thing down here on the center line. We got all that taken apart. Putting it back together was a little harder than taking it apart because you got to get all these joints to slip over each other. And a lot of this was meant to be done, like I said, in the factory with the right tooling, and we're doing it out there in the field on the ramp. But we got it done. Bill Morris was so happy. He says he's never seen anything done like this. This was basically depot level maintenance done without even regular flight line equipment. But we got it put back together February of 21. And what you're seeing here is the last closeout panel that goes over the where the gun was. We all got to sign the inside of that panel. So that's our little bit of immortality. We got to put our names on the inside of the jet. Here's the steel work that it was still sitting in at that time. And you know, some of the other things we have to do here. You can see one of the flags you saw on the air show paint job peeking through there. It's part of our aviation archaeology, sanding things down to get to the next layers. I told you they drilled a bunch of holes in the duct. These up here, the YF-16 was long before there were lantern pods and it didn't have any mounts, so they decided to cut holes in the duct and add lantern hard points so they could test that on the pole. And there's lots of holes to be patched, and so you take the 6'4" ex-engineer and stuff him in the inlet duct to do sheet metal repairs. So I spent a number of Saturdays curled up in the inside of the airplane, riveting sheet metal back in place. And the last piece that had to go in there was they call the belly band. Just like the factory, just like the production airplanes, that's the last thing to go in after you put things together. So once again, kind of upside down in the duct with a huck fastener gun, putting things back together. Landing gear. They said they threw the original landing gear away. Now the good news is, one of the things, when I first came to work for Jerry, the guy sitting right next to me was Travis Putman, who designed the landing gear for both the YF and the F-16. And I will tell you, Travis Putman is a mechanical genius, and he saved our lives on this program. We were able to get a set of Block 20 landing gear from a wrecked airplane up at Shepherd Air Force Base. Early model, fairly lightweight F-16 production bird. We'll talk about that in just a second. Ben Guttery is a great scrounger. He knows people, he hears things, he calls people up and says, hey, would you just give us that stuff? And they did. Now, before we went in there, here's what 40 years of rust and corrosion and junk looks like in the main landing gear well. And by the way, the Air Force had stripped all the wiring and all the plumbing out of this to save weight when they put it on a pole, so we didn't have to work around any of that. So we soda blasted the interior of the landing gear wells, and this is me in August in a bunny suit, spray painting the inside of the gear wells with white polyurethane, make it all nice and shiny again, because this is going to be a museum quality airplane. The landing gear, when we got it, was a pile of parts on a pallet. You know, if you've ever been in F-16 where they assembled landing gear in F-16, Manasco would send it to us on this special hydraulic lift. It was already assembled, and it goes in as one piece, and you just put the bolts in. We got it as a kit. And we, once again, these pieces came off a wrecked jet, so we cleaned those up. We power washed them, degreased them, sorted out what we had, how many bolts did we need to go find. Here's David Anderson, his VK's son, and I in there. And basically, we put the gear together one leg at a time, put the down strut here, the tension strut, and then the shock strut, and then the thing. And this is where I say Travis Putman is a genius, because all the mount points on the prototype worked so well, he just carried them over to production. So the big paper pin that goes here on the drag strut just slipped right. I had to degrease it, clean up the dirt and junk that was on it, put new grease on it, it went in a hole, and the nut went on. And if it hadn't been for that, I'm not sure how we would have gotten wheels underneath this airplane. But Travis and Gordon Gibson and the guys that designed this airplane did it right on the prototype. They were viewing number 2 as a pre-production airplane. So they were making things carry over into production. So we got that all on there. The guys over here at Carswell were kind enough to us to give us some new tires. The tires that came with that wrecked airplane gear were just rotting from dry rot. Interesting thing is this airplane, 72-01568, is still an active tail number in the U.S. inventory. So the 301st was able to give us new tires and wheels and just write that tail number on the paperwork. The U.S. Air Force Museum actually owns the jet. It's on loan to us as long as we take good care of it. But so the 301st was able to send the wheels over to the tire shop and put new tires on them. The landing gear doors, once again, the lab had thrown away the AIM-7 launching doors and the original doors. They didn't exist. They had just put flat sheet metal over it when it was on a pole. So what we did was we also got the Block 20 landing gear doors from Shepherd, from their wrecked airplane, and started putting them up there and fitting them. And I went through all the drawings and things and realized, production gear doors are about 4 inches longer than the prototype gear doors because they had moved the retract actuator for the doors. Instead of being on top, it was in the front. We said, okay, we'll fix that. We'll go ahead and just cut 4 inches off this door and redo the sheet metal work at the edge. Here's David grinding away on things here. They also, the hinges are different from production because these hinges were D6 AC steel that were done to hold the 500-pound AIM-7 out there, and there's 5 hinges instead of the 3 that are on a production bird. So we fabricated new hinge pieces out of aluminum angle stock, mounted them on here. You see a lot of primer going on there, and made them fit. So those doors probably would not close exactly perfectly, but it's never going to have to do that. It's going to sit on the ground, and they look right. The nose landing gear door, when you saw that nose landing, it scraped off. The YF-16 had a 2-piece nose landing gear door instead of the single piece on production. This part in yellow down here is, Phil was going down the runway on the airplane on its nose. It was removing sheet metal from that door. So that's some replacement sheet metal work here. You can see the blue paint job where we sanded off the paint to do this repair. That's the part of the blue belly band that will go on there. One of the things we've been doing as we go through sanding off the old paint is taking pictures and measurements of all the markings and things so we can paint it back up like it was in 1975. So these doors are the original doors with repairs on them, and we'll just hang them on there. We don't have all the actuators and things to retract them, so we're using solid links. Just make it look right is where we're going with this. Fuel tank covers. To hang the wings, we know we have to get in here and put the bolts in from the inside. Once again, several hundred rusted in place fasteners, lots of drill bits made dull, and lots of things drilled out, and then replacing nut plates. So last fall we started scraping down the wings and things, working on getting down in there. And once again, aviation archaeology, you'll see light blue paint, you'll see white paint, you'll see the red paint from the air show markings, and the Air Force and stars and bars. We've carefully measured where those go exactly and how big they are. One of the interesting things we noticed about this was that all the markings are huge for an airplane this size. And we figured out that Bob Cunningham, the staff artist for GD back in those days, had kind of come up with this scheme of using F4 size markings on the YF-16 because it makes the airplane look smaller by having really big stars and bars. I found some notes from, yeah.
They changed the radar size to be like the production, but they left the wing at 280 square feet instead of 300.
No, they did one trick to that also.
Well, the place I was headed is doing radar test with armament on this too small wing is not like a production airplane.
No. What they did, well, here's some of the things. We had some corrosion things to deal with, where they had those two big steel plates on the side of the body. Putting steel up against aluminum and leaving it there in the rain for 40 years is a bad idea. So we've had to buff things out to bare metal, reprime them. So we're fixing those things. Jerry, the answer to your question is two things they did. The wingspan was slightly different. They undid the tip rib, slid it outboard 6 inches, and put 6 inches of bogus sheet metal out there, with about 75 fasteners in that I've personally drilled out over the last summer. They also when they stretched the forward fuselage, they had thrown away the Zim's rotary drive actuators for the leading edge flap and replaced them with solid aluminum blocks that were 10 inches longer. So they increased the chord of the wing and the span of the wing to make it
Without changing the box size.
right. They just changed everything around the edges of the structural box to make it approximately right. And they also drilled new hard points in this wing that weren't there because the YF only had 7 hard points instead of 9. So they've added more hard points to it.
Replicate
Sort of.
production spacing for the hard
Yep.
storage.
So we're kind of at this stage. We're about ready to bead blast the rest of this paint off. We've determined that no amount of scraping and sanding is going to get it smooth enough because we've got little chips of different layers of paint, and it's all uneven. So we found a company that has come in and given us a really good deal on bead blasting with little glass beads. Take it down to bare metal. We'll start with primer. We'll bring it all the way back up in one color, because one of the things about doing the air show paint job is gloss white paint shows all the imperfections. If it was matte gray, you can get away with a lot of sins on a paint job. When you make it gloss white, it's got to be done a little smoother and a little better than we would otherwise do it. So after we get things painted, we've also had to invent some tooling and things to hang wings. Once again, we don't have all the factory stuff. We've been out shopping for wing bolts. Got those now. Finding aircraft wing bolts in the sizes that go into an F-16 is not trivial. We're having a new nose built. We have the original YF-16 lines drawing, and some of my good friends I used to work with in engineering, in their own time, not on company time, digitized the drawing, made it into a CATIA file, and the company that builds the full-scale F-35 mock-ups for Lockheed for free made us a mold. They took the CATIA drawings we had and made a numerically controlled mold. Butch Sickles, who worked in the fiberglass mock-up shop, is in the process of making us a new nose to replace the one that got blown off. So we are going to have the original YF-16 shape nose. It's probably not going to have all the right access panels in it because we just want to make the shape right and get the paint job on it. We're in the process of getting all that metallic gray paint off, taking it a layer at a time. So we're going to bead blast it down to bare metal and build it back up. The composite tail surfaces we're going to hand sand. We're not going to take a bead blaster to the graphite epoxy skins there. They also put a metallic coating on the canopy as part of their testing to make it. We've got the folks from what's now PPG, used to be Techstar, are going to come over and see if they can attack it with their industrial buffers and things. Now, it doesn't have to be optically perfect, but we're trying to get it so it's see-through again. But if you saw some of the pictures, it's kind of a metallic gold color. A lot more detailed things to do, but the answer is we're headed for an airplane that looks like it looked in 1975. And this is kind of we view it as the crown jewel of the Fort Worth Aviation Museum's collection because it meant so much to the city of Fort Worth. You know, this was the start of 4,600 airplanes that put a lot of people's kids through college and put dinner on the table for all of us, and it's a good thing. So we're taking care of it.
Good job. Don't go away. Okay. Kevin pointed out that it's going to be the crown jewel of the museum. When we first got this airplane, we looked at it and said, what kind of a pole do we want to put it on? Right?
Yeah, that was no landing gear.
And Bill Morris said, this is not going to go on a pole. Now, everything that Kevin has been telling you about made the restoration of this airplane much more difficult to go do. And the ingenuity of these 5 or 6 guys that have been working on this is unbelievable, along with some help from some of the other folks out at the museum. Mm-hmm. And they're doing this outdoors on a ramp. And you know what the weather's like around here, so it's been really a challenge. Twice a week, I guess you work on the airplane?
Tuesdays and Saturdays.
Yeah, Tuesdays and Saturdays. Bill Morris would grab a box of donuts each of those days and going out there. And as Bill got to the point where he couldn't do any work anymore, they'd put him in a chair, and he'd start directing from the chair of what was going on. So if you haven't been out to the museum, you need to come out. Mm-hmm. Mr. Hodson is doing an excellent job as the head of the museum. We are actually going to make this into a full-fledged permanent museum at Meacham Field. We've gotten the airport to agree to give us more land, and we're going into the process now. Jim and I are raising funds to finance this new effort. We would appreciate any help you can give us, even if it's just putting word of mouth out, coming out. How many of you worked on the B-36 restoration? Any of you?
Me.
There you go. All multi-talented.
Well, that's where I learned my sheet metal work.
That airplane, when that airplane was fully restored, if we could have put engines on it, it could have flown. We lost that airplane because we couldn't put it under roof. And I was deeply involved in that also. And the reason we couldn't put it under roof was it was so huge that to put it in a building, it defined what the building was going to be like. And it did not make it user-friendly for a museum from doing that. So the Air Force finally got tired. They came in one day, ripped it apart, and took it out to Arizona and put it on outside out there. But their excuse for doing it was that's dry, hot air. And I said, there's hot air, but it's not on that airplane. So the bottom line is we've got a lot of airplanes out there. We've got an F-4 Blue Angel airplane out there. There's a lot of history. In fact, a lot of the people that worked at Lockheed Martin and Bell have been donating their personal things to the museum. So one of the things we're hurting for right now is a place to store this stuff. So we finally decided we're going to go rent a place off base and put it there where it's in climate control. So we really are getting a headwind going now, and we're all excited about it. And if you'd like, we can make a point of coming in every so often and bringing you up to speed on what we're doing. Okay? We'll take any questions if you've got them. I guess Jerry's the only one that had a question. Yes, sir.
You open on Saturdays now? Is that the only time?
Saturdays and Sundays.
Saturdays and Sundays?
Right now it's...
You can go to our website and they'll tell you, but right now with the way that the COVID thing is going, it's kind of hard to keep it open much more than that.
So it's Saturdays and Sundays, 9 a.m. to 2 in the afternoon.
And we have events. Hops and Props is one of our more favorite ones, and there's other events that we have out there. So check on at the website every so often to see what's going on.
Hops and Props is when we have the local beer brewers in, all the craft beers, and they'll have 18 or 20 craft beer houses set up in their tents among the airplanes so you can drink beer and look at airplanes. What's wrong with that?
I could answer that question, but I won't. And I tell you what else I will tell you right now. As you're well aware, Alliance has been home to the Fort Worth Air Show. It probably will be the last air show this year, because with the FedEx, Amazon, and another commercial airplane put out there, we just can't do any of our Category 1 airplanes and make it work. In fact, we had the Blue Angels out here this last year, and they said, we aren't coming back. So they're talking to Ross Perot, I think, next week, and the options they're presenting to him is one more air show or we quit now. So some folks are looking at options. There aren't a lot of good options, because when you've got a Category 1 jet team, they've got certain requirements that make it really hard to put it someplace. For example, when we do it out at the Alliance, the Amazon facility across the runway has to be vacated while they're flying. So it becomes real. There's all sorts of rules that go along with that, and it's just really difficult. So I had resigned from the aviation air show at the end of this last year, and I got a call, and I'm now back on the air show committee to try and help them decide what that last air show would be like if it happens. So just a little bit of update for you on what's going on. So, any other questions? Yes, sir.
Fort Worth has some of the best museums on earth, as you know, but not a real aviation museum. Even though we're an aviation city. Why don't you present to us the plans of what it takes to pull in the money, the space, and no kidding, where you could display not only YF-16s, but maybe even B-36s eventually.
I tell you what we'll do. We're putting together a plan to go out and talk to donors, and that will basically be what you're asking for. We'd be glad to come back and show you that plan when we're ready to do that. One of the things, Jerry.
We've got some donors that have the money.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we do.
By the way, I got your name on my list already.
And if you recall correctly, I was on the city council for 8 years. In that whole 8 years, I worked hard to get a museum. And those big donors didn't want a thing to do with that museum. Bass family, particularly Robert, we couldn't really get them to be interested at all. So I think we've got a story now that says this is serious, this is going to happen, and we can probably get some of those folks to unlimber some money. But I used to say, we'd say this is Cowtown. And I would say it's only Cowtown because it became the aviation center for a lot of great airplanes and helicopters. So, Jim, anything else you want me to add?
No, sir, you did great, both of you.
Okay, good to see all of you. It's kind of like a family reunion, so
Yep.
take care.